Welcome everyone. As most of you know, today is May 8th, which is White Lotus Day, when we honour H.P. Blavatsky, who was the main foundress of the Theosophical Society. So I thought I'd do my little bit by doing this talk called Madame Blavatsky, Head and Heart. So Helen Petrovna Blavatsky, H.P. Blavatsky, or HPB as I will call her from now on, as she actually didn't like to be called Madam, so I hear. Maybe because of the associations, I don't know. But she was born on August 12th, 1831. I think that's a different calendar. In our calendar it was July 30th to 31st, the midnight hour. At Ekaterinslav, that's how you pronounce it, Russian Ukraine, daughter of Colonel Peter von Hahn and novelist Helena Andreevna. From being very young, she displayed certain psychic powers. In 1849, at the age of 16, due to a dare from a governess, she married the much older Nikov Blavatsky, and some months later, realizing her mistake, she began more than 20 years of extensive travel, bringing her into contact with mystic traditions the world over. She first met her master Moria in Hyde Park during the Great Exhibition of 1831, and he outlined what her work was to be. She also claimed to have entered Tibet for a total of 7 years, which at that time was practically inaccessible to foreigners. She writes, "I have lived at different periods in Little Tibet, as in Great Tibet, and these combined periods form more than 7 years. Yet I have never stated either verbally or over my signature that I had passed 7 consecutive years in a convent. What I have said, and repeat now, is that I have stopped at Lamaistic convents, that I have visited Sigadze, the Tashi Lunpo territory and its neighbourhood, and that I have been further in and in such places of Tibet as have never been visited by any other European, and that he can never or ever hope to visit." So I wonder whether that's true now, with the modes of transport we have now, and aeroplanes and helicopters and drones, etc. But probably true. It's probably a place where it cannot be accessed physically. In 1873, HPB arrived in New York, and in July 1875 she was urged to establish a philosophico-religious society, and in the autumn of the same year she became the principal founder, along with Colonel Henry Steele Olcott and William Quan Judge, of the Theosophical Society, and she devoted the rest of her life to that society. Although her character seemed somewhat coarse for polite Victorian society, the master stated that she was the best choice available for the work to be done. This may suggest she wasn't the first choice, but the only one available at that time. In the 14th century, the Tibetan Buddhist reformer Tsongkhapa had initiated the idea that during the last quarter of every century some effort was to be made to enlighten the world. The Theosophical Society was that effort for the 19th. I think in the 18th it was Mesmer, Cagliostro and Comte de Saint-Germain. In the 20th there was a great influx of spirituality with the New Age movement and several gurus coming from the East. Of course discrimination is needed, but if one is grounded in true theosophy or spirituality, then that shouldn't be too difficult. Also a vast amount of literature has been published since then, and more of an awareness of universal brotherhood, despite antagonistic forces. But in spiritual literature, there's always someone or something that opposes the efforts of reformers or positive movements of any kind. So during her life, HPB was the first Russian woman to become naturalized as an American citizen. She then started to write her first major work, Isis Unveiled, and after its publication in 1877, she and Henry Steele Olcott left for India. There they worked to re-establish Oriental philosophy and religious ideas, largely through the pages of the Theosophist, a magazine which HPB founded and edited. She and Olcott established a new headquarters for the Theosophical Society at Adyar in India. Whilst on a visit to Sri Lanka, they took Pansil, which means they became Buddhists, a fact that has significance as the Theosophical masters were avowed followers of Gautama Buddha and esoteric Buddhism in general. In 1884, while she was travelling in Europe, certain Theosophical Society employees in India went to local missionaries with forged documents, bringing charges of fraud against her. These charges were investigated, and although an initial report was unfavourable to her, it was eventually decided that the charges were unjustified. Unfortunately, that was much, much later. The stress associated with the investigation contributed to a breakdown in HPB's health, and in 1885 she left India for Europe, where she continued to write and organise on behalf of the Theosophical Society. In 1887 she settled in London and began a new magazine, Lucifer, which means light bringer. It's nothing to do with the devil as the Christians tried to associate it with. Her principal work, entitled The Secret Doctrine, was published in 1888, and in the same year, aided by W.Q. Judge, she formed the esoteric section of the Theosophical Society. Shortly afterwards, she wrote The Key to Theosophy and The Voice of the Silence. In 1890, she became the head of a newly established European section and started an inner group. She died in London on May 8, 1891, after many years of chronic illness. On more than one occasion, she was given the choice to shake off her mortal coil or continue the work, which meant more suffering. She chose the latter. Towards the end of her life, HPB produced a book just mentioned, The Voice of the Silence, which was a translation of certain aphorisms she had committed to memory from various sources, mostly Buddhist and some from others. She dedicated the book to the few and stated, "It has been thought better to make a judicious selection only from those treatises which will best suit the few real mystics in the Theosophical Society, and which are sure to answer their needs. It is only these who will appreciate these words of Krishna Christos, the higher self. Sages do not grieve for the living nor the dead. Never did I not exist, nor you, nor these rulers of men, nor will any one of us ever hereafter cease to be." In the second fragment, which is titled The Two Paths, she states concerning these, "There are two schools of Buddha's doctrine, the esoteric and the exoteric, and these are respectively called the heart and the eye doctrine. Bodhidharma called them in China, from whence the names reached Tibet, the Stung men, the esoteric, and the Kiao men, exoteric school," if I've pronounced those right. It is so named because it is the teaching which emanated from Gautama Buddha's heart, whereas the eye doctrine was the work of his head or brain. The heart doctrine is also called the seal of truth, or the true seal, a symbol found on the heading of almost all esoteric works. As HPB and the Masters were continuing the work started by Gautama Buddha, HPB's teachings followed the same pattern. Also in The Voice of the Silence it states, "Search for the paths, but, O Lanu, be of clean heart before thou startest on thy journey. Before thou takest thy first step, learn to discern the real from the false, the ever-fleeting from the everlasting. Learn above all to separate head learning from soul wisdom, the I from the heart doctrine. Yea, ignorance is like unto a closed and airless vessel, the soul a bird shut up within. It warbles not, nor can it stir a feather, but the songster mute and torpid sits, and of exhaustion dies. But even ignorance is better than head learning, with no soul wisdom to illuminate and guide it. That's very important. But even ignorance is better than head learning, with no soul wisdom to illuminate and guide it. Now once, when she was giving a study class to some pupils, they complained that she was only giving them advice that they could get in their grandmother's sermons. And why wasn't she giving them instructions as how to develop their psychic and spiritual powers, etc.? But she replied with words to the effect that unless you could follow the advice given in your grandmother's sermons and try to live it, you couldn't be trusted with such powers. So this is the attitude to take when studying Theosophy. If we fall victim to the dead letter, then we will have nothing of value to take over to our next incarnation, as brain-mind knowledge dies with the brain, and only the essence remains, and that is beyond words and images. Again, the voice of the silence says, true knowledge is the flower, false learning is the husk. If thou would eat the bread of wisdom, thy flour thou hast to knead with Amrita's clear waters. Amrita means immortality. But if thou kneadest husks with Maya's dew, Maya illusion, thou canst create but food for the black doves of death, the birds of birth, decay and sorrow. So true knowledge is the flour, false learning is the husk. If thou wouldst eat the bread of wisdom, thy flour thou hast to knead with Amrita's clear waters. But if thou kneadest husks with Maya's dew, thou canst create but food for the black doves of death, the birds of birth, decay and sorrow. Now the Secret Doctrine seems a very daunting book, if merely read with a lower mind. The essential message of this book is to assign our place in nature and to show us that we are a part of the divine plan, as much a product of nature as a tree or a flower. When we are told about rounds and races, planes of being, it is really about refining states of consciousness and our worldview changing as we become more illumined by the Divine Spirit. Everything takes place where we are now. There's no going elsewhere. Globes and spheres, etc. are just ways of attempting to make the teachings clearer to us, but have to be understood as pointers to the truth. It's a process of awakening, following Plato's axiom that all learning is merely recollection. HPB told us to reduce everything to states of consciousness. That's a very important statement. Reduce everything to states of consciousness. So the key to understanding theosophical teaching is the use of the intuition. HPB writes, the infinite cannot be known to our reason, which can only distinguish and define. But we can always conceive the abstract truth thereof, thanks to that faculty higher than reason, intuition, or the spiritual instinct. She also says, Theosophy, therefore, or rather the occult sciences it studies, is something more than simple metaphysics. It is, if I may be allowed to use the double terms, meta-metaphysics, meta-geometry, etc., or a universal transcendentalism. Theosophy rejects the testimony of the physical senses entirely, if the latter be not based upon that afforded by the psychic and spiritual perceptions. Even in the case of the most highly developed clairvoyance and clairaudience, the final testimony of both must be rejected unless by those terms is signified the ecstatic illumination of Plotinus or Porphyry. The same holds good for the physical sciences. The evidence of the reason upon the terrestrial plane, like that of our five senses, should receive the imprimatur, if that's the right word, imprimatur, of the sixth and seventh senses of the divine ego, before a fact can be accepted by the true occultist. So, she's saying the intellect only takes us so far, and then we have to leave it behind and understand by direct perception. But we do need the intellect to reach this state, but the intellect illumined by the intuition, or buddhi, eventually, as we call it in Theosophy. The mind has to become manasa tajasa, which just means the illumined mind. So the true key to Theosophy is motive. The masters wanted a brotherhood of humanity and a real universal fraternity started. Certain objects were decided on in 1879 when the following 7 points were included in the objective. It starts by saying the Theosophical Society is formed upon the basis of a universal brotherhood of humanity. The Society's plans are declared to be as follows. 1. To keep alive in man his spiritual intuitions. 2. To oppose and counteract, after due investigation and proof of its irrational nature, bigotry in every form. 3. To promote a feeling of brotherhood among nations. 4. To seek to obtain knowledge of all the laws of nature and aid in diffusing it, and especially to encourage the study of those laws least understood by modern people, and so termed the occult sciences. 5. To gather for the Society's library and put into written forms correct information on ancient philosophies, etc. 6. To promote in every practicable way non-sectarian education. 7. To encourage and assist individual fellows in self-improvement, intellectual, moral and spiritual. So later these were abbreviated to what we now know as the 3 objects. As said earlier, it is very important to understand the motive behind the starting of the Theosophical movement, as unless we do, we may become lost in mere head learning. HPB writes, though but a minority of our members are mystically inclined, yet in point of fact, the key to all our successes, as above enumerated, what she was writing about, but we could apply them to the objects, the original objects, as above enumerated, is in our recognition of the fact of the higher self, colourless, cosmopolitan, unsectarian, sexless, unworldly, altruistic, and the doing of our work on that basis. To the secularist, the agnostic, the scholastic scientist, such results would have been unattainable, nay, would have been unthinkable. Peace societies are utopian, because no amount of argument based upon exoteric considerations of social morals or expediency can turn the hearts of the rulers of nations away from selfish war and schemes of conquest. Now H.P. Blavatsky tells us in the Bowen Notes that we must always keep the idea of the oneness of all things at the back of our minds when studying, or our studies will lose their meaning and just become intellectual luxury. Sri Shankaracharya states that the mind can be lost in a labyrinth of words, like a man in a thick forest. So when asked what are the 3 most important qualities for an aspirant to have, she replied, 1. Common sense. 2. A sense of humour. And when asked for the 3rd, she said, just more common sense. Because HPB's books are very deep and difficult to study sometimes, we tend to forget that she had a great sense of humour, which comes through in some of her letters. A sense of humour also gives us a sense of proportion at times, and scientific studies are proving the therapeutic effects of laughter, for example. There's the old saying, laughter is the best medicine, which science is now proving to be true. One website says, laughter is a powerful antidote to stress, pain and conflict. Nothing works faster or more dependable to bring your mind and body into balance than a good laugh. Humour lightens your burdens, inspires hope, connects you to others, and keeps you grounded, focused and alert. It also helps you release anger and forgive sooner. With so much power to heal and renew, the ability to laugh easily and frequently is a tremendous resource for surmounting problems, enhancing your relationships, and supporting both physical and emotional health. Best of all, this priceless medicine is fun, free, and easy to use. So that sounds very nice. There are also very detailed accounts of the positive effects of laughter and humour, which would take a whole lecture to explain. So maybe I should do that one day. But it highlights the importance that HPB attached to having a sense of humour and not becoming too poor-faced in our studies, and to keeping a common sense attitude, not becoming too way out or weird. Of course, common sense is not the common sense that is thought of as common sense in society, which is based upon materialistic principles. It's the common sense based on spiritual ideals and spiritual teachings, spiritual awareness. And these hints, like grandmother's sermons, are much more important than they may seem on the surface. Although the ideas of reincarnation and karma were known in the West before the advent of the Theosophical Society, there were some very strange ideas about them and a lot of confusion. Theosophical teaching helped to clear up that confusion and give us an intelligent body of information regarding the processes that were logical and consistent. Again, reference was given to nature and the cyclic processes that go on in and around us, the seasons, day and night, waking and sleeping, life and death. If we are part and parcel of nature's unfolding, then we go through these cycles too, the same as everything else in nature. We have our birth, maturity, old age and death, but also our rebirth, like a tree that sheds its leaves in winter only to be reborn in the spring. We have our spring, summer, autumn and winter, but then spring always comes round again. If we are part of nature, then it is logical that we are part of the cyclic processes of nature. Theosophy also teaches us that once we reach the human stage, we cannot go back to being, as some religions say. Exoteric Buddhism and Hinduism talk about rebirth as animals, but Theosophy says this is not possible. It's onwards and upwards until we get beyond the need for reincarnation as we know it, unless we voluntarily want to return to help humanity. HPB in the Key to Theosophy says that karma, the law of cause and effect, is like throwing a stone into a still pond and causing ripples. For harmony to be restored, the ripples can reconverge on the point of disturbance, which is us, individually and collectively. There is not just a personal karma, but a karma of the family, town, country and planet of which we are a part, and maybe of the solar system and universe itself. So it's all about restoration of broken harmony. This is what compassion is about. The voice of the silence says, compassion is no attribute. It is a law of laws, eternal harmony, a liar self, a shoreless universal essence, the light of everlasting right and fitness of all things, the law of love eternal. The more thou dost become at one with it, thy being melted into its being, the more thy soul unites with that which is, the more thou wilt become compassion absolute. And in a footnote to this, she says, this compassion must not be regarded in the same light as God, the divine love of the theists. Compassion stands here as an abstract, impersonal law, whose nature being absolute harmony is thrown into confusion by discord, suffering and sin. Compassion then is a desire in us to restore broken harmony. That's why on a very simplistic level, if you see someone crying and upset, you want to end their tears. So you'll say or do something that restores the harmony in them. The same analogy can be used on many levels, from the personal to the universal. It should be thought out and acted upon. People and organisations throughout the ages have attempted to restore the broken harmony in the world. The Theosophical Society was one such attempt, by trying to show that we all share the same spirit. We don't have our own individual spirit, it's the same in all of us. This is how true universal brotherhood and sisterhood is reached, not by religious or political brotherhoods, which are transitory. The present Dalai Lama stated, "I see with ever greater clarity that our spiritual well-being depends not on religion, but on our innate human nature, our natural affinity for goodness, compassion and caring for others." And HPB says in the Key to Theosophy, "It is only by all men becoming brothers and all women sisters, and by all practising in their daily lives true brotherhood and true sisterhood, that the real human solidarity, which lies at the root of the elevation of the race, can ever be attained. It is this action and interaction, this true brotherhood and sisterhood, in which each shall live for all and all for each, which is one of the fundamental theosophical principles that every theosophist should be bound not only to teach, but to carry out in his or her individual life." Very profound words. So Theosophy teaches us that we pass through 7 rounds of existence. We come down through the first 3, from a state of unconscious perfection, to the 4th, our earth, where we become aware of our imperfections. Each of these rounds, sometimes called globes, are further divided into 7 races. They're even further divided to 7 sub-races. But for the sake of this talk, we will just deal with the main 7 root races. The first race dwelt in the imperishable sacred land, the second in the Hyperborea, the third in Lemuria, and the 4th in Atlantis. The present is the 5th, or Aryan race. The 6th and 7th are yet to come. And we are just through the lowest point of the process and on our way upwards towards the 3 higher rounds. So as the secret doctrine states, we can now proceed by self-induced and self-devised efforts towards a state of conscious perfection as a result of all our experiences gained through many lives. Sorry, I've got a bit of a throat today. Theosophists are often called Seveners because it is taught that this earth is based around the number 7, the 7 rounds and races mentioned, and has 7 principles. There are 7 colours of the rainbow, 7 basic musical notes, 7 days of the week, etc. And there is a correspondence between all of these, which the intuitive student can discover to his or her advantage, if that is their path in life. HPB was a brilliant writer. Her articles are charged with a spiritual power that has a beneficent and purifying effect on the mind of the reader. She had a poetic soul, even though she is not known to have written any poems as such, but it shines through in some of her writings. When younger, she was an accomplished concert pianist and had toured with Clara Schumann, the wife of the composer Robert Schumann. Colonel Olcott has attested to the magic of her improvised playing on the piano. Taking into account that English was her 3rd language, after Russian and French, it is a great accomplishment to be able to express herself so lucidly in English. An example of this is, "Our society is a tree of brotherhood, grown from a kernel, planted in the earth by the angel of charity and justice, the day the first Cain slew the first Abel. During long centuries of the subjugation of women and of the suffering of the poor, this kernel was watered by the bitter tears shed by the weak and the oppressed. Blessed hands transplanted it from one corner of the earth to another, under different climes, and at epochs distant from one another. Do not do unto others what you would not wish others to do unto you, said Confucius to his disciples. Love one another and love all living creatures, preached Gautama Buddha to his Harats. Love one another was repeated as a faithful echo in the streets of Jerusalem. It is to the Christian nations that belongs the honour of having obeyed this supreme commandment by their master in all its paradoxical force. Caligula, the pagan, wished that humanity had but one head, so that he might sever it with one blow. Christian powers have improved upon this desire, which hitherto had remained theoretical, after seeking and finally finding the means to put it into practice. Let them therefore prepare to cut each other's throats, and let them exterminate more people in one day in war than the Caesars killed in a whole year. Let them depopulate whole countries and provinces in the name of their paradoxical religion, and let them perish by the sword, they who kill by the sword. What concern of ours is that? And of course nowadays the same can be said of fundamentalist Islam too. Theosophists are powerless to stop them. That is true. But it is in their power to save as many survivors as possible. Being a nucleus of a true brotherhood, it depends upon them to make of their society an ark destined in a future not too distant to transport the humanity of a new cycle beyond the vast muddy waters of the deluge of hopeless materialism. These waters are rising and at the present moment flood all the civilized countries. Are we going to let the good perish with the bad, afraid of the hue and cry and the ridicule of the latter, either against the Theosophical Society or ourselves? Are we going to see them perish one after the other, one from fatigue, the other vainly seeking the ray of sunlight which shines for all, without throwing them a plank of salvation? Never. End of quote. So this outlines the hope that HPB held out for the Theosophical Society, that it would be a means of helping humanity to become aware of its true spiritual nature, and to understand that beyond all the seeming confusion and chaos in society, just one heart beats, that of humanity. One sun shines on us all, not just on us all, but also within us all. The spiritual sun that takes no cognizance of race, creed, sex, caste or colour, that separate us on the surface, but it pierces the illusion to the fact that and awakens us to the fact that we are all one in essence. We are all one in essence. I think one of the few people to give us an insight into the real HPB was one of her pupils, William Kingsland, who wrote in a memorial after her death on May 8, 1891, "She taught us Theosophy, not as a mere form of doctrine, not as a religion or a philosophy or a creed or a working hypothesis, but as a living power in our lives. It is inevitable that the term Theosophy should come to be associated with a certain set of doctrines. In order that the message may be given to the world, it must be presented in a definite and systematic form. But in doing this, it becomes exoteric, and nothing that is exoteric can be permanent, for it belongs to the world of form. She led us to look beneath the surface, behind the form, to make the principle the real motive of our life and conduct. To her, the term Theosophy meant something infinitely more than could be set before the world in any key to Theosophy or secret doctrine. The nearest approach to it in any of her published works is in The Voice of the Silence. Yet even that conveys but imperfectly what she would, had the world been able to receive it, have taught and included in the term Theosophy. The keynote of her teachings, the keynote of her life was self-sacrifice. But stay, disciple, yet one word. canst thou destroy divine compassion. Compassion is no attribute, it is the law of laws, eternal harmony, Elias self, a sureless universal essence, the light of everlasting right and fitness of all things, the law of love eternal, as I mentioned earlier. Now bend thy head and listen well, O Bodhisattva. Compassion speaks and saith, can there be bliss when all that lives must suffer? Shalt thou be saved and hear the whole world cry? And thus, though doctrinal Theosophy speaks of Devachan and Nirvana, of rest for the weary, storm-tossed pilgrim of life, of a final goal of bliss past all thought and conceiving, yet to those who are able to receive it, it says that there is something higher and nobler still, that though thrice great is he who has crossed and won the Arihata path, he is greater still, who having won the prize, can put it aside and remain unselfish to the endless end. And so, HPB often pointed out to us those men and women who were true Theosophists, though they stood outside of the Theosophical movement and even appeared antagonistic to it. Already in the world, a Theosophist has come to mean someone who believes in reincarnation and karma, or some other distinctive doctrine. But the term was never so limited in its application by the great founder of the Theosophical Society. She taught these doctrines in order that men might dissociate themselves from all forms of doctrine and reach Elias self. There is no older doctrine than this of divine compassion, of universal brotherhood. It is the essence of all the teachings of all the Buddhas and Christ the world has ever known. It is above all doctrines, all creeds, all formulas. It is the essence of all religion. Yet men ever miss it, miss the one principle which alone can save the world, and take refuge instead in the selfish desires of their lower nature. End of quote. Fantastic words those by William Kingsland. And to end with HPB's words, when the artificial chilly flame of modern materialism is extinguished for lack of fuel, those for whom the great hope of existence beyond the grave is a vexation should prepare for the greatest disappointment they could possibly have. For out of the deep, muddy waters of materiality, a mystic force is rising. It is but the first rustling, but it is a superhuman rustling. It is supernatural only for the superstitious and ignorant. The spirit of truth is passing now over the face of dark waters, and imparting them is compelling them to reveal their spiritual treasures. And this spirit is a force that cannot be hindered and can never, never be stopped. Remember that. The force of the spirit can never, never be stopped. Not by materialism, by antagonistic forces, by forces of evil, by politics, by religion, by whatever. It is a force that cannot be hindered and can never, never be stopped. And to finish with a nice quote, in a garden of sunflowers, from HPB again, in a garden of sunflowers, every flower turns towards the light. Why not so with us? And why not so with us? Why should we not turn ourselves towards the light, the divine light, and make it the guiding force in our lives, go under its aegis, under its guidance, and live for the good and benefit of all? Radiate out love and compassion into the world. It needs it at this time, these particularly difficult times. It needs spirituality. Only spirituality can save the world. If you want, only love can save us. Love in its true spiritual sense can save us from what's going on. And there are millions, thousands of people, probably millions, who are on this path, who can help to bring this about. So let's go about doing it, those who are a little bit awake, who are aware of what's going on. Let's help those who aren't aware. Give them a helping hand, guidance, instruction, practical help in whatever way we can. So thanks for listening, and see you soon. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace. Peace on earth and goodwill to all beings. Thank you.